Most people think they control their financial future. But the truth is, you're playing a game where the rules are constantly being rewritten by governments. And if you don't understand how they do it, you're at a massive disadvantage. Think about this. Every time a central bank lowers interest rates, it inflates the value of assets you may not even own. Every time new money is printed, the money in your wallet quietly loses power. And every time the government bails out a sector, it's choosing winners and losers in an economy that's supposed to be free. In this video, I'm going to show you how governments subtly manipulate economic forces, so you can recognize the signs and make smarter financial moves. By the end, you'll understand how to protect your wealth from inflation, recessions, and political decisions that the average investor completely overlooks. Let's start with the big one, monetary policy. It sounds technical, but it affects every corner of your life. The main player here is the central bank. In the US, that's the Federal Reserve. In Europe, it's the European Central Bank. Their role? Control inflation, stabilize the currency, and support employment. But how do they do that? Interest rates are their favorite weapon. When they want to stimulate the economy, they lower rates, making borrowing cheaper. That encourages people to take out loans, spend more, and invest. Sounds good, right? But here's the catch. Low interest rates also make saving money less attractive. So while the rich borrow to buy more assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, the middle class sees their savings earn next to nothing. This creates one of the most underappreciated wealth transfer mechanisms in modern history. People who own assets get richer. Those who don't, they fall behind. And over time, this gap widens until it becomes a structural issue. Governments know this, but they also know that short-term growth often wins votes, even if it creates long-term inequality. Now, when lowering interest rates isn't enough, central banks reach for something even more aggressive: quantitative easing. That's when they pump money into the economy by buying government bonds and other financial assets. The goal is to inject liquidity into the system and push investors to take more risk. But here's what they don't tell you. That liquidity mostly ends up inflating financial markets, not helping small businesses or the average family. It's why we've seen stock markets hit all-time highs while real wages stagnate. It's why billionaires saw their net worth explode during global crises while millions struggled to pay rent. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just how the system works. While central banks pull the strings of monetary policy behind the scenes, elected governments play their own game with fiscal policy, and it's just as powerful. But unlike monetary policy, which can feel abstract, fiscal policy hits you directly. It's the taxes you pay, the public services you receive, the debt your country takes on, and the spending decisions that shape your daily life. At first glance, it sounds simple. Governments collect taxes and use that money to build roads, fund schools, and support healthcare. But here's where it gets tricky. When spending consistently exceeds revenue, governments borrow. And that debt, it doesn't disappear, it piles up, and eventually someone has to pay. You might think, well, if they're borrowing to invest in the economy, isn't that a good thing? Sometimes, yes. Productive government spending, like infrastructure, education, or R&D, can stimulate growth and create long-term value. But too often, fiscal policy is driven not by strategy but by politics. And that's where the real damage begins. Let's break this down. When an economy slows, governments often respond with stimulus spending, massive injections of money into the system to prevent a crash. Think of what happened in 2008 or during the COVID crisis. Direct checks to households, bailouts for airlines and banks, emergency unemployment programs. In theory, these moves help stabilize demand and avoid economic collapse. But there's always a catch. Stimulus spending increases national debt. And when that debt grows too large, it leads to a dangerous temptation to let inflation eat it away. Governments can't openly say, we're going to devalue our currency. But they can increase spending while central banks keep interest rates low and buy the debt themselves. Sound familiar? It's a hidden tax. Your dollars, euros, or pesos lose purchasing power, slowly, quietly, year after year. Meanwhile, the government gets to spend more, and the official debt-to-GDP ratio stays manageable, on paper. Now let's talk taxes. Taxes are more than just a way to raise revenue. They're a tool of behavioral control. Want fewer people to smoke? Raise tobacco taxes. Want to promote electric cars? Offer tax breaks for EV buyers. Want to make the rich pay their fair share? Introduce progressive income taxes. But the real power of taxes lies in how they influence economic incentives. When tax codes get complicated, full of loopholes, deductions, and special exemptions, they don't just raise money, they steer capital. Corporations hire armies of accountants to legally avoid billions in taxes. Wealthy individuals restructure their income to pay less. Meanwhile, small business owners and salaried workers carry the bulk of the burden. And here's the twist. Sometimes governments introduce tax changes not to collect more, but to win elections. A flashy tax cut just before voting day can win popular support, even if it adds to long-term debt. A new wealth tax can grab headlines, even if it raises little money and causes capital flight. All of this creates distortion. The economy stops being a system of organic growth and becomes a manipulated landscape shaped by short-term decisions and political agendas. But it doesn't stop there. Because when things go wrong, when inflation spikes, when recessions hit, when debt spirals out of control, governments often blame the market. They rarely admit the role their own policies played. In the final part, we'll connect all the dots. We'll look at how these tools, monetary and fiscal, combine to rig the game, and what strategies you can use to stay one step ahead. By now, you've seen how monetary policy controls the flow of money, and how fiscal policy controls the flow of spending. But the real story begins when these two forces combine, because that's when governments go from reacting to shaping the entire financial landscape. Let's be clear, this isn't always malicious. Policymakers often face impossible trade-offs: growth versus inflation, debt versus unemployment, short-term relief versus long-term pain. But in trying to solve problems, they often create new ones. And that's where you need to be paying attention. Take a step back and look at what happens when central banks keep interest rates low and governments increase spending at the same time. You get what economists call policy coordination and what investors call asset bubbles. Because when capital is cheap and abundant, it flows fast, usually into stocks, real estate, and high-yield assets. We've seen this before. The housing bubble in 2008, the tech-driven surge in 2020-2021, even the crypto boom. When the music's playing, it feels like free money. But when policy shifts, when rates rise or spending slows, the crash comes hard and fast. And here's the issue. The people who suffer most during these corrections are rarely the ones who benefited most during the boom. The wealthy have access to hedging tools, diversified portfolios, and insider knowledge. The average investor, they get left holding the bag. So what can you do? The first step is to stop thinking of the economy as a free market and start seeing it as a managed system. That doesn't mean you should become cynical. It means you should become strategic. Here are a few rules that can protect you. Follow the incentives. Governments will always act in their own interest: re-election, economic stability, and debt control. If you can anticipate their moves, you can position your assets accordingly. When spending is rising and rates are low, risk assets usually perform well. When inflation picks up and policy tightens, you need to pivot fast. Own real assets. Inflation is the silent killer of wealth. Cash loses value, bonds get crushed. But assets like real estate, commodities, and equities with pricing power tend to hold their ground. Governments can print money, but they can't print farmland, gold, or apartment buildings. Watch the debt cycle. Most major economic events are tied to the expansion and contraction of credit. If debt levels are unsustainable, a correction is coming. It's just a matter of when. Learn to read central bank signals, fiscal deficits, and inflation data like an investor, not just a citizen. Diversify globally. When one government overreaches, capital moves elsewhere. That's why global diversification isn't just a luxury, it's a defense. If your entire portfolio is tied to one currency, one tax regime, or one economic policy, you're exposed. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is this: you are not powerless. The game may be rigged, but it's still a game. And those who study the rules, observe the players, and stay one step ahead tend to win over time. So the next time a politician promises a stimulus package or a central bank announces a rate hike, don't just listen, interpret. Ask yourself, who benefits? Who pays the price? And most importantly, how do I position myself to survive the storm and thrive in the calm that follows? If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, should we dive deeper into how central banks work or explore the hidden costs of inflation next? Because if you don't understand how the economy is being shaped around you, you will be shaped by it.